It was a quiet, crisp morning in the small suburban town of Meadowbrook, where life usually moved at a slow, predictable pace. The town's charm lay in its serene streets, lined with neatly trimmed hedges and cozy coffee shops. But beneath the calm facade, not everything was picture perfect. Officer Bradley, a local cop with a reputation that preceded him, was patrolling the streets in his cruiser. Known for his sharp uniform and smug attitude, Bradley wasn't your average neighborhood hero. Instead, he had earned a name for himself as the officer you didn't want to cross paths with, especially if you were from a minority background. To the townsfolk, he was a symbol of authority, but to those he targeted, he was a menace, using his badge to harass and intimidate. Bradley spent most of his shifts scanning for minor infractions, expired parking meters, a cracked taillight, or someone parked a little too close to a fire hydrant. These were opportunities for him to flex his power, demand bribes, or simply make someone's day miserable. This morning, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, Bradley's eyes fell on a sleek black sedan parked near the town's only elementary school. Instantly, suspicion sparked within him, setting the stage for what would be a day unlike any other. Officer Bradley cruised down Maple Avenue, the heart of Meadowbrook's affluent neighborhood. His sharp eyes scanned the streets like a hawk, seeking out anything or anyone that looked out of place. It didn't take long for something to catch his attention. A sleek black sedan idling outside Willow Creek Elementary, one of the town's most prestigious schools. Behind the wheel was a black woman, calmly sitting and checking something on her phone. To Bradley, that alone was suspicious. He frowned and slowed his cruiser to a crawl, his mind racing with assumptions. "What's she doing here?" he thought. "This neighborhood doesn't see people like her unless they're cleaning someone's house." Pulling up behind her car, Bradley switched on his lights and stepped out. The woman, startled but composed, rolled down her window. "Good morning, officer," she greeted with a warm, polite smile. Bradley didn't return it. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his tone sharp. "I'm parked, officer," she replied calmly. "I'm waiting for—" "This is private property," he interrupted. "You have no business loitering here." Her brows knit slightly, but she kept her composure. "I'm here for an appointment at the school. Appointment?" Bradley cut her off again, his tone dripping with skepticism. "With who?" "Principal Davis invited me," she explained patiently. "I'm Miss Harper." Bradley didn't care. To him, her name and demeanor meant nothing. "Well, Miss Harper," he said mockingly, "you're sitting here with no proof. Step out of the vehicle." Miss Harper's calm faltered for a split second. "Officer, I assure you—" "Step out," he snapped, his hand already resting on his holstered weapon. Reluctantly, she opened the door and stepped out, standing with her hands visible. "I don't understand why this is necessary," she said, her voice still steady but tinged with disbelief. Bradley smirked. "Necessary? Ma'am, you're trespassing in a neighborhood you clearly don't belong in. You're resisting my authority by questioning me." "I'm not resisting," she said softly. "I'm simply explaining." Her refusal to argue infuriated Bradley further. He stepped closer, his posture intimidating. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he barked, as though she were a dangerous criminal. By now, a few parents dropping off their kids began to notice the scene unfolding. Miss Harper glanced at the growing crowd, but chose not to draw more attention to herself. "Officer, I'm only here for—" she began again, but Bradley wasn't listening. He twisted her arm and snapped on the handcuffs. "You're under arrest for trespassing and resisting," he announced loudly, as if putting on a show for the onlookers. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, but Bradley didn't care. Miss Harper, her composure intact despite the humiliation, didn't resist as she was led to the cruiser. Inside the car, she sat quietly, her gaze fixed out the window. Bradley smirked smugly as he drove off, convinced he'd done his duty. Little did he know, this arrest would soon unravel a chain of events that would shake his world to its core. The air in the station was filled with the hum of phones ringing, voices murmuring, and the steady clatter of keyboards. It was business as usual at the Meadowbrook Police Department, until Officer Bradley strode in, his chest puffed out, leading a handcuffed Miss Harper. Heads turned as the pair entered, curiosity rippling through the room. It wasn't every day that someone so dignified in appearance was marched in like a common criminal. Miss Harper, dressed in a smart blazer and carrying an air of quiet confidence, seemed out of place among the usual stream of petty offenders and traffic violators. "Got ourselves a trespasser," Bradley announced loudly, his voice dripping with triumph. "Caught her loitering outside Willow Creek Elementary. Said she had some made-up appointment with the principal." Miss Harper's eyes flickered, but she remained silent. Her calm demeanor only seemed to fuel Bradley's fire. "Bet you thought you could just stroll into a neighborhood like that and no one would notice, huh?" Bradley sneered. "Well, not on my watch." Some officers exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the thinly veiled prejudice in his tone. One rookie officer even opened his mouth to speak but thought better of it. Bradley was not someone you questioned, especially not in public. Miss Harper, however, didn't flinch. She stood tall, her hands cuffed behind her back, her expression serene. "Officer," she said softly, "you're making a mistake." "A mistake?" Bradley barked, his laugh sharp and mocking. "The only mistake here is thinking you can talk your way out of this." He led her to the booking desk, where a weary-looking sergeant raised an eyebrow at the sight of her. "What's the charge?" the sergeant asked, his tone neutral. "Trespassing and resisting arrest," Bradley replied briskly. "Resisting?" Miss Harper interjected, her voice even. "I didn't resist. I complied with every instruction." Bradley leaned closer, his face inches from hers. "Talking back is resisting," he said coldly. "You people are all the same. Always have an excuse." A hush fell over the room. Even the hum of the station seemed to pause for a moment. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, and a few officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Miss Harper's gaze locked with Bradley's, steady and unwavering. "I won't dignify that with a response," she said quietly, her voice firm but measured. "You're entitled to your opinion no matter how wrong it may be." Bradley's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. He hadn't expected her restraint, her composure. He was used to people yelling, crying, or begging, all things he could exploit. But this woman was different, and it unnerved him. "Take her to holding," he snapped, regaining his bravado. "Let her sit for a while and think about how things work around here." As Bradley escorted her down the hallway to the holding cells, Miss Harper's silence seemed to grow louder, more powerful. She walked with her head held high, refusing to let the situation break her spirit. Bradley, on the other hand, felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation creeping into his chest, unease. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something, that there was more to this woman than met the eye. When they reached the holding cell, Bradley unlocked the door and gestured for her to step inside. "Make yourself comfortable," he said with a smirk. "You're going to be here for a while." Miss Harper turned to face him, her expression calm but resolute. "You don't know who I am, Officer Bradley," she said, her tone steady. "But you will." Her words lingered in the air long after the cell door clanged shut. Bradley scoffed and walked away, but her voice echoed in his mind, unsettling him in a way he couldn't quite explain. Back in the main office, a few officers whispered among themselves, questioning the legitimacy of Bradley's arrest. One of them discreetly checked the logs for Willow Creek Elementary and found Miss Harper's name listed as a scheduled guest speaker for that morning. The discovery sent a ripple of shock through the department. Unaware of the brewing storm, Bradley sat at his desk, still basking in the glow of his so-called accomplishment. Meanwhile, in the holding cell, Miss Harper sat calmly, her hands resting in her lap. She knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. For now, She waited, her dignity intact, confident that justice would prevail. Bradley leaned back in his chair, his feet propped up on the desk as he lazily filled out the paperwork for Miss Harper's arrest. His smirk hadn't faded since he'd brought her in, confident he'd done a fine job protecting the town from another troublemaker. He casually entered her name, Harper Clarissa, into the department's system, expecting to find nothing more than a clean slate or minor infractions, just enough to justify his bias. But as the screen populated with results, Bradley's smugness turned to confusion. His brow furrowed as he skimmed through her records. There was no criminal history, no unpaid parking tickets, not even a speeding violation. Instead, what appeared on his screen left him frozen. Clarissa Harper wasn't just anyone. She was someone. Her profile highlighted a long list of accolades. A nationally awarded educator, recognized for her work in underprivileged communities across the country. She had founded a nonprofit dedicated to improving literacy rates in low-income areas and had been invited to speak at prestigious events, including conferences attended by senators and governors. Most recently, she had been invited by Willow Creek Elementary to deliver a keynote address on fostering inclusivity in education. Bradley's chest tightened. He scrolled further, his palms beginning to sweat. There were articles featuring her as a changemaker, interviews where she passionately advocated for children, and even a photograph of her standing alongside the state's governor, holding an award for her contributions to education reform. "What the hell?" he muttered under his breath. Before he could process what he was seeing, the door to the station burst open. In walked Chief O'Connor, a towering figure with a reputation for fairness and a no-nonsense attitude. His sharp blue eyes scanned the room, narrowing the moment they landed on Bradley. "Where is she?" O'Connor barked, his voice echoing through the station. Bradley shot to his feet, his unease now morphing into panic. She's in holding," he stammered. "Why is she in holding?" O'Connor demanded, his tone sharp enough to cut through steel. Bradley swallowed hard. "I caught her trespassing outside Willow Creek Elementary. She said she had an appointment, but—" "She did have an appointment," O'Connor thundered. "She was invited by Principal Davis as a guest speaker. Do you have any idea who she is?" Bradley opened his mouth to respond, but found himself speechless. The entire station had gone quiet, officers now watching the scene unfold with bated breath. O'Connor didn't wait for an answer. He stormed down the hallway toward the holding cells, leaving Bradley rooted in place. When the chief reached the cell, he stopped, his expression softening as he saw Miss Harper sitting calmly on the bench inside. "Miss Harper," he said, his voice steady but tinged with regret. "I am so sorry for this ridiculous and completely unacceptable situation." Miss Harper looked up, her composed demeanor unchanged. "Chief O'Connor," she said, standing gracefully, "I appreciate your apology, but I'd like to understand why this happened in the first place." The chief unlocked the cell and gestured for her to step out. "You'll have every explanation and assurance that this will be addressed," he said firmly. Turning to the officers gathered nearby, he barked, "Someone bring Miss Harper some water and make sure she's comfortable in my office. Now." Miss Harper followed him to the office, where she took a seat across from his desk. O'Connor sat down, his shoulders heavy with embarrassment. "Miss Harper," he began, "Officer Bradley acted completely out of line. I can't express how sorry I am for the way you've been treated." Before she could respond, the office door swung open, and Bradley shuffled in, his face pale. O'Connor's glare was enough to make him regret entering, but the chief gestured for him to stand at attention. "Explain yourself, Bradley," O'Connor demanded. "Why did you arrest this woman?" Bradley hesitated, his usual bravado stripped away. "I thought she didn't belong there," he said weakly. "She was sitting outside the school and it seemed suspicious." It seemed suspicious, O'Connor repeated, his voice rising. Because of her skin color? Because she didn't fit your narrow-minded idea of who should be in that neighborhood? Bradley stammered. I didn't mean it like that. I was just doing my job. Your job is to protect and serve, not harass and humiliate, O'Connor snapped. Miss Harper is a distinguished educator, a guest in our town, and you treated her like a criminal based on nothing but your own prejudice. Miss Harper, who had been silent during the exchange, finally spoke. Chief O'Connor, she said, her tone calm but firm. I appreciate your defense, but this isn't just about me. This is about a culture that allows officers like him to act this way without consequences. How many others has he humiliated before me? O'Connor's face darkened with shame. You're right, he admitted. This department has work to do, and I promise you it starts now. He turned back to Bradley. Effective immediately. You're suspended without pay pending an internal investigation. This department will not tolerate behavior that undermines the trust of the community. Bradley's face flushed with anger and humiliation, but he nodded, knowing he had no defense. Yes, sir, he muttered, before slinking out of the office. Once he was gone, O'Connor faced Miss Harper again. I can't change what happened, he said, but I can ensure that steps are taken to make this right. Please, let us support your work and amplify your message. Miss Harper studied him for a moment before nodding. Accountability is the first step, she said. If you're willing to take it, I'll be watching. The chief escorted her out of the office personally, ensuring she was treated with the respect she deserved. As she left the station, the officers stood silently, each one feeling the weight of what had just transpired. Back in the holding cell, now empty, the echoes of Miss Harper's calm yet powerful words lingered, a reminder to everyone in the station that change was long overdue. The station was unusually quiet, the tension from the morning's events still hanging heavy in the air. Miss Harper, now seated comfortably in Chief O'Connor's office, had accepted a cup of tea, but hadn't touched it. Her composure remained intact, a testament to her strength of character, even after the humiliation she had endured. The door creaked open, and Officer Bradley stepped inside, his posture stiff, his face a mixture of discomfort and resentment. Chief O'Connor stood behind him, his presence an unspoken reminder that Bradley was to listen and learn. The other officers, curious but cautious, stood at a respectful distance, aware that they were about to witness something important. Miss Harper looked at Bradley, her gaze steady but not unkind. Officer Bradley, she began, her voice calm and deliberate. I'd like to speak to you directly if you don't mind. Bradley shifted uncomfortably. Yes, ma'am, he mumbled, his usual arrogance subdued. She leaned forward slightly, her hands resting gently on her lap. You don't know me, but you made assumptions about who I am based on nothing more than how I look. I've seen this happen before, many times, to people who don't have the voice or the platform to defend themselves. I'm lucky that I do, and today, I want to use it. Her words were measured, but the weight of them filled the room. Bradley didn't respond, his jaw tightening as he stared at the floor. When I was young, she continued, I grew up in a neighborhood where poverty and crime were part of daily life. My parents worked tirelessly, but opportunities were scarce, and the odds were stacked against us. Many of my friends didn't make it out. They were trapped by a system that didn't care about them, a system that saw them as problems rather than people. She paused, her eyes softening. But I had a teacher who believed in me. She saw past the statistics and the stereotypes and treated me like I mattered. She taught me that education wasn't just about learning facts. It was about understanding the world, finding your voice, and using it to make a difference. Miss Harper's voice grew warmer as she spoke, her passion shining through. That's why I became a teacher, not just to educate kids, but to show them that they matter, that they're capable of more than what society tells them they can be. I've worked in some of the toughest neighborhoods, helping kids find their potential, kids who've been told they'd never amount to anything. She paused again, this time looking directly at Bradley. Some of those kids were the children of police officers like you. They told me about the pressure they felt, the expectations placed on them, and how hard it was to see their parents struggle with the weight of their jobs. And you know what I taught them? Respect, empathy, the understanding that everyone has a story, even those who seem different from us. Bradley's shoulders sagged slightly, her words cutting through his defenses. He shifted his gaze to meet hers, his expression conflicted. You see, Officer Bradley, she continued, her tone gentle but firm, I believe we all have the capacity to change. You have power, a badge that gives you the authority to protect and serve. But that power comes with responsibility. What you did today wasn't just about me. It was about how you see people and how those actions ripple through the community. The room was silent, every officer hanging on her every word. Even Chief O'Connor looked humbled, his usual stoic expression softened with respect. Miss Harper leaned back slightly, her voice taking on a hopeful note. I don't know what led you to become a police officer. Maybe it was to make a difference, to help people. If that's the case, I'm asking you to think about the kind of legacy you want to leave behind. Do you want to be remembered as someone who judged people unfairly, or as someone who learned from their mistakes and became better for it? Bradley's throat tightened, and he looked away, struggling to find the words. Finally he spoke, his voice low. I never thought about it like that, he admitted. I don't know why I did what I did today, but I'm sorry. Miss Harper nodded, a small, understanding smile crossing her lips. Apologies are a start, she said, but actions are what matter most. If you truly want to make a difference, start by seeing people as individuals, not assumptions. Bradley nodded, his face flushed with embarrassment, but also a flicker of something new, self-awareness. As the weight of her words settled over the room, the other officers exchanged glances, many of them clearly moved. Some were thinking about their own biases, while others reflected on moments they might have acted unfairly. Miss Harper had not just addressed Bradley, she had held up a mirror to everyone present. Chief O'Connor stepped forward, breaking the silence. Miss Harper, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. Thank you. Your words have given us all something to think about. Miss Harper stood, extending her hand to Bradley. It's never too late to change, she said. Bradley hesitated, but then shook her hand firmly. Thank you, he said quietly, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. As she left the station, the room remained silent, the officers deep in thought. Miss Harper's words had planted a seed, one that would grow into something far greater than she might ever see. For Bradley, it was a turning point, a chance to become the man he had once hoped to be. The following day, news of the incident at the Meadowbrook Police Department spread quickly. The local paper had caught wind of the story, highlighting how a respected educator, Miss Clarissa Harper, had been unjustly arrested by a corrupt officer. Social media amplified the narrative, with many praising Miss Harper's composure and calling for accountability from the police department. Chief O'Connor wasted no time addressing the issue publicly. Standing at a podium outside the station, flanked by senior officers, he announced Officer Bradley's immediate suspension and the launch of an internal investigation into his conduct. This department holds itself to the highest standards, O'Connor declared to the reporters and onlookers gathered. What happened yesterday was unacceptable, and we are committed to ensuring that such incidents do not occur again. Officer Bradley's actions do not reflect the values of this department or the community we serve. Standing among the crowd was Miss Harper, her poised figure a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding the event. When reporters spotted her, microphones and cameras turned toward her, hoping for a statement. She stepped forward, her calm yet powerful demeanor instantly commanding attention. "I appreciate Chief O'Connor's swift action and his commitment to accountability," she began, her voice steady and resonant. "What happened to me was not an isolated incident. It is a symptom of a much larger issue, one that cannot be fixed by suspensions or apologies alone." The crowd fell silent, hanging on her every word. "I stand here today not to demand punishment for Officer Bradley, but to advocate for change," she continued. "Bias and prejudice, whether conscious or unconscious, undermine the trust and safety that should exist between law enforcement and the community. Accountability is essential, but so is education and training. We must equip our officers to see the humanity in every person they encounter." Miss Harper paused, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. "As for Officer Bradley," she said, "I forgive him. Not because what he did was excusable, but because forgiveness is the first step toward healing and growth. However, forgiveness does not absolve responsibility. It is my hope that he reflects on his actions and uses this experience as a catalyst to change, not just for himself, but for everyone he encounters moving forward." Her words resonated deeply with those present. The crowd erupted into applause, a mix of admiration and agreement. Even those who had initially been skeptical of her intentions couldn't deny the strength and wisdom in her message. Inside the station, Bradley sat in a quiet room, watching the press conference on a small television. He felt a knot tighten in his chest as he listened to Miss Harper's words. Her forgiveness stung in a way he hadn't expected. It wasn't pity. It was an invitation to be better. A reminder of how far he had fallen from the ideals he once held when he first put on the badge. Bradley leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as the weight of his actions pressed down on him. He thought about the countless traffic stops, the assumptions he had made, and the power he had abused. He remembered the stories Miss Harper had shared, the kids from tough neighborhoods, the lessons of empathy and respect. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar: shame. The next morning, Bradley walked into Chief O'Connor's office, his suspension letter in hand. He looked weary but determined. "Chief," he began, his voice subdued, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Not just to you or the department, but to Miss Harper and everyone I've wronged." O'Connor studied him for a moment before nodding. "Acknowledging your mistakes is a start, Bradley," he said. "But words aren't enough. If you're serious about changing, you'll have to show it." "I am," Bradley said earnestly. "I want to do better." "Good," O'Connor replied. "Start by enrolling in the bias training program we're implementing. And when the investigation concludes, if you're still with us, you'll have to prove that you've earned back the trust of this community." Bradley nodded, accepting the terms. "I will." Meanwhile, Miss Harper returned to her work, her schedule filled with speaking engagements and educational initiatives. Her story had inspired people far beyond Meadowbrook, sparking conversations about reform and empathy in communities nationwide. Despite the challenges she faced, she remained steadfast in her mission, believing that even the smallest changes could lead to a better future. Months later, Bradley stood outside a classroom in a community center, part of the bias training program the department had partnered with. Inside, he saw officers and community members sitting together, sharing stories and perspectives. Bradley hesitated before stepping in, his heart heavy but his mind resolute. He wasn't sure if he could fully redeem himself, but he knew he had to try. As the session began, Bradley listened intently, his mind replaying Miss Harper's words. Respect, empathy, understanding that everyone has a story. For the first time in his career, Bradley felt like he was starting to understand what it truly meant to protect and serve. The story ends with Bradley walking out of the training session hours later, the sun setting behind him. His face carried no smugness or bitterness, only quiet determination. Miss Harper's words had planted a seed within him, one that he hoped would grow into something better. For her, for the community, and for himself. As the screen fades to black, the narrator's voice begins, calm and reflective, resonating with the emotions of the story just told. In life, our greatest lessons often come from our mistakes, moments when we fall short of the values we strive to uphold. Officer Bradley's story is not unique. It reflects a broader reality that exists in communities across the world. The danger of assumptions, the harm of unchecked bias, and the power of change when we choose to see each other as human beings, not as stereotypes. The scene shifts to a montage. Miss Harper standing in front of a classroom, speaking passionately to a group of children. Bradley sitting in a training session, listening intently as a community member shares their story. The images are simple but powerful, underscoring the narrative's central themes. Miss Harper's grace and courage remind us that forgiveness is not about excusing wrongs. It's about creating an opportunity for growth. By confronting injustice with dignity and empathy, she not only held a mirror to those who wronged her, but also extended a hand, inviting them to reflect and transform. The visuals now show a neighborhood park where children of different backgrounds are playing together. Parents, some in uniforms, watch from nearby benches, their conversations relaxed and friendly. The sense of unity is palpable. In every community, there is a choice: to build walls of division or to build bridges of understanding. Respect, empathy, and kindness are the tools that allow us to connect despite our differences. When we listen to one another's stories, we realize that our shared humanity is far stronger than the biases that divide us. The montage continues. Bradley helping an elderly man cross the street, his demeanor softer, more thoughtful. Miss Harper addressing a room full of educators and officers, her words inspiring hope and action. This story is not just about a corrupt officer or an unjust arrest. It's about the ripple effect of actions, the potential for redemption, and the power of individuals to make a difference. When we challenge our own biases, when we treat others with the respect they deserve, we create a ripple that extends far beyond our own lives. The final scene shows a sunrise over the town of Meadowbrook, the light casting a golden glow over its streets and homes. The narrator's voice, warm and hopeful, delivers the closing line. Change doesn't happen overnight, and it isn't always easy. But it begins with a choice to see, to listen, and to care. And in making that choice, we not only transform ourselves, but also the world around us. The screen fades to black, and on-screen text appears in bold letters. Be the change. Choose empathy. Choose respect. A moment of silence follows before soft, hopeful music plays and the credits roll, leaving the audience with a sense of reflection and inspiration.